This is the 1968 Nolan Ryan rookie, PSA 10. It's the only example out of almost 12,000 submissions to PSA. In August 2020, it sold for $600,000 at auction. To give you some perspective on just how tough PSA is on this card, consider this. The 52 Mantle, with only 1,700 submissions, has 3 times as many 10s. The 71 Clemente, one of the toughest 10s of the entire 1970s, and in the toughest set, has that same single PSA 10, but with less than 1/3 as many submissions as the Ryan has. These well-known iconic rookie cards have more 10s graded by PSA than the Ryan, despite also only having a fraction of the total submissions. With only 1/100th of 1% of submissions grading a 10, PSA is telling us that the Ryan rookie is one of the toughest 10s in the entire hobby. But what makes it so tough? Condition sensitivity is the most common reason given for why some cards have a low incidence of high-grade examples. There are certain cards in the vintage baseball card hobby that everyone knows suffer from true condition sensitivity issues that explain why their 10s are either limited or non-existent. But the Ryan rookie isn't on that list. Even more unusual for a card like this, I couldn't find a single source in the hobby that even pretends to say it's a condition-sensitive card. I looked through auction listings, hobby books, even at PSA's own profile of the 1968 set, and the Ryan card specifically. There's nothing, no reason given, official or otherwise, for why PSA is so tough on this card. Unsatisfied, I wanted to test conclusively whether or not condition sensitivity plays a role in how PSA grades this card. I did that using their own data found in the population reports. First, I looked at the 1968 set as a whole, which is not known as a particularly tough set for grading. In fact, quite the opposite. To measure the condition sensitivity of Topps vintage sets, I used one primary variable, the percentage of cards submitted that were given either a 9 or a 10 by PSA. Sets we all know are very condition sensitive, 1962 and 1971, have, not surprisingly, an extremely low rate of cards getting a mint grade by PSA. But look at 1968. At nearly 23% of all cards submitted getting a mint grade, it is certainly the least condition-sensitive set of any vintage Topps baseball set before 1972. You can also add that the Ryan rookie, at card number 177, is from the second series of the set. It's not a short print, and there are no particular supply issues that you would have with similar, high-numbered series of cards. All that tells me, at least on paper, is that a card like the 68 Ryan shouldn't theoretically be that unusually difficult to obtain in high grade. We shouldn't expect to see only one gem mint example, like we would with other, much more tougher sets like the 71 and 62. And you'll see this is true if you look at other top-tier Hall of Famers in the 1968 set. We're talking players like Mantle, Mays, Clemente, all of whom have quite a few PSA 10s graded. Probably the most glaring example is Johnny Bench, another iconic rookie card from the same set, the second most valuable card behind Ryan. There are 15 Gem Mint 10 examples of this card, with 27% fewer submissions than the Ryan. So clearly something is going on with the Ryan rookie. Another method I use to examine condition sensitivity is by analyzing the original Topps printing sheet with a variable called the 9-10 ratio. The 9-10 ratio is simply that, the ratio of 9s to 10s given by PSA. It's a measure of how tough PSA is on a particular card. Essentially, it says that PSA gets a card that both the submitter and PSA agree is a mint card. It's either a 9 or a 10. Visually, the difference between a 9 or a 10 is very subtle, and absent any marks or stains on the card, the final grade might come down to as little as a 5% difference in centering on the front. Because of these very slight differences, it's really tough to argue whether such a mint card is either a 9 or a 10. It's an opinion. But when it comes down to important cards in the hobby, like the Ryan rookie, it's not just an opinion, there's some context behind it. Because I can analyze hundreds of thousands of grading decisions from the PSA Pop reports, I found a pattern. There are certain cards that PSA is extremely reluctant to award 10s on. I see this with a lot of cards that collectors identify as key cards in the hobby. Cards such as these have very high 9-10 ratios relative to other cards in their same sets. These high 9:10 ratios are an indication that PSA is engaging in population control of these cards, deliberately limiting the number of Gem Mint 10 examples. Perhaps the most notorious vintage card that's pop controlled is the 1980 Rickey Henderson Rookie, which I took an exhaustive look at in a previous video. Is the Ryan Rookie a pop controlled card? Its 9:10 ratio is 65-1, which certainly gets my attention. That means that when PSA gets a mint card from a submitter, its grading decision is 65 times more likely to be a 9 than a 10. For all the other cards in the 1968 set, that ratio is only 7-1. To see what an outlier that 65-1 is, I looked at the 9:10 ratios for the other top-tier Hall of Famers in the 1968 set. They range from 8-1 for players like Gibson and Banks to 43-1 for Seaver. The average for these top-tier Hall of Famers is less than 20-1. So the Ryan 9:10 ratio really stands out, even among this elite group. When we have cards with true condition sensitivity issues, the most common reason is the card's placement on the printing sheet. So let's examine the actual printing sheet for the second series of the 1968 set. The analysis here involves comparing the 9:10 ratio of the Ryan card to other similarly placed cards on the same sheet, both the Commons and Hall of Famers. You can see here that the Ryan Rookie's on the left edge of the sheet in the first column, 8th row. I found this extremely interesting because while edge cards can have centering issues, I've never seen anyone point out this card's placement as a reason for why there's only the 110. I started by computing the 9:10 ratios for the cards that both surround the Ryan and the one that's on the opposite position on the print sheet, Pete Semino. You can see that none of these cards have a 9:10 ratio anywhere close to the Ryan. In the past, critics have said it's unfair to compare a card like Earl Wilson, which has only been submitted 304 times, to one that's been submitted more than 10,000 times. But I think this reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how ratios work. Obviously, collectors submit every Ryan they can get their hands on, while only picking out the best Earl Wilsons to send in. But that doesn't matter because the 9:10 ratio only looks at cards that are mint, 9 or 10. The Ryan cards that are in lesser condition are not factored in and are completely irrelevant to the analysis. That is why I use ratios, so I can make meaningful comparisons between vastly different cards. In that same vein, I looked at the 9:10 ratios of all the other edge cards on the printing sheet. You can see on the bottom edge that 3 cards have 9:10 ratios over 40-1. That could indicate some condition sensitivity with cards on the bottom edge. But we see no such indication of that along the left edge, where the Ryan card is. I looked next at the sheet's corner cards, as we've been told that corner cards can be very condition sensitive too. It's the same thing here, nothing comes close to the 9:10 ratio of the Ryan. Most curious is the Roberto Clemente card, a card that has over 3,500 submissions. Its 9:10 ratio is only 14-1, despite being printed both along the right edge and the top right corner. Another top-tier Hall of Famer, Hank Aaron, is also on the same printing sheet as the Ryan. His card has 3,700 submissions to PSA, but with a 9:10 ratio about half the Ryan's. For the entire 1968 set, the Nolan Ryan Rookie has the highest 9:10 ratio of any card in the set. Examining the data from the printing sheet doesn't get us any closer to understanding why. Let's look next at some of the Ryan cards themselves. Here's the 110 that PSA has graded. It seems to have really strong centering, corners, and edges, with maybe the slightest of tilting towards the bottom right. But it's a much different story on the back. PSA's own grading standards say that the centering on the back can be 75-25 and still be gem mint. Is that 75-25? I'm not sure. What do you think? Next, I want to see what the PSA 9 Ryan rookies look like. Kind of lost here is that PSA has graded very few of those either. There's only 65 9s, an incredibly small 0.5% of all Ryans submitted to PSA. Of those 65, I was able to track down pictures of 33 examples. It's pretty clear if you look at enough Ryan rookie cards that it's the centering on the back that can often make or break these cards. There's a lot of examples here of poor back centering that would prevent a 10. Rarer are the 9s that have decently centered backs but aren't as well centered on the front, like these. Then there are a handful of 9s that have backs with about the same or better centering as the 110, and with fronts that are nearly as close to perfect as well. But then we have these cards. 5 are the 9s that have better back centering than the 10, and front centering that looks, at least to me in the pictures, to be just as perfect as the 10. To me, PSA could have graded these 5 cards a 10, and there would be few arguments. Here's what I take away from all this. First, the Pop Report data shows that the Ryan Rookie card is not a condition-sensitive card. Second, there are a number of examples of mint cards that could have reasonably been graded a 10 instead of a 9. This all tells me that there should be more 10s than just the one that PSA has graded. When it comes to important cards like this, a factor you can't overlook is the potential value of a 10 in the marketplace. And that's where the question of population control comes in. To me, looking at all this data, it does appear that PSA is artificially and deliberately restricting the supply of 10s for the Ryan Rookie card. What bothers me the most about this is that PSA tells collectors that their grading is largely objective. You want to believe them since that's how the grading system should operate. A 10 should be a 10, no matter who submits it. But then you see something like this operating out in the open, in plain sight for anyone to see, no explanation. We already know about all the trim cards that got through PSA's grading process, and how a small number of seemingly preferred customers are able to get large numbers of consecutive Gem Mint 10 grades for vintage cards. What else is going on at PSA that we don't know about? As always, I'm curious what you think about this research, and I look forward to our conversations in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.